So, have you ever really thought about how modern families are built, especially when the, traditional path just isn't an option? Well, today we are going to dive deep into the incredible science, the really complex ethics, and the constantly evolving laws around surrogacy and this amazing process called reciprocal IVF.
For so many people, and especially for same-sex couples, this isn't some abstract question, right? It is the very real, often challenging first step on their journey to becoming parents.
And the answer? Well, it almost always involves this powerful mix of deep personal commitment, some seriously cutting-edge science, and trying to navigate a legal system that's, frankly, still trying to catch up. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the science, how this all actually works, then we'll walk that ethical tightrope, get into the weeds of the legal maze, and of course, talk about the financial reality. And we'll wrap up with what is probably the most crucial step of all, legally securing your family. All right, let's get into the how. How do these processes actually create a family? Let's break down the two main pathways we're talking about today. So first up, surrogacy. And the most important thing to get your head around is the genetics. With gestational surrogacy, which is way more common these days, the surrogate has zero genetic link to the baby. But with traditional surrogacy, she is genetically related because she's also the egg donor. And that distinction, it's a huge deal, legally and emotionally. And that leads us right into reciprocal IVF. You'll sometimes hear it called shared motherhood, which is just a perfect description. It's this beautiful way for a couple with two uteruses to both be biologically part of the process. One partner gives the egg, so she's the genetic mom, and the other partner carries the pregnancy. So how does it unfold? Well, it's like a carefully choreographed dance. It all starts with stimulating and retrieving eggs from one partner. Then those eggs get fertilized in the lab with donor sperm. And finally, one of those tiny little embryos is transferred into the other partner's uterus, which has been perfectly prepped to welcome it. But look, the science is really only half the story. These are deeply, deeply human journeys, and that means they come with some profound ethical questions for absolutely everyone involved. This quote, man, it just nails the core challenge. You've got the intended parents, you've got the surrogate, and you have the future child. And the tricky part is making sure everyone's needs and rights are being carefully considered and balanced. Now, a huge part of the ethical debate comes down to money. On one hand, you have commercial surrogacy, where carriers are paid a significant fee. This raises some tough questions about potential exploitation. On the other hand, there's altruistic surrogacy, where payments are strictly limited to covering costs. Most ethicists see this as the better path, because it frames it as an incredible gift, not a business transaction. So it all boils down to this really key idea of undue inducement. Basically, the payment should never be so high that it could pressure someone into making this life-altering decision if it's not truly right for them. That's why the intense medical and psychological screening for surrogates is so important, to make sure it's a fully informed, fully empowered choice. It's a very fine line. Okay, so let's shift gears and see how all these ethical ideas play out in the legal world. And in the United States, oh boy, it is a mess. This is probably the single most important thing you need to know. There is no federal law on surrogacy. None. It's all left up to the states, which means you have this crazy hodgepodge of laws. In one state, it might be totally fine, but you cross the border into the next, and it could be illegal. Your rights literally depend on your zip code. And just look at these maps. They show you the situation perfectly. Now, the good news is that thanks to marriage equality, the gap between straight and gay couples has almost disappeared. But look at all that yellow and red. There are still so many states that are legally risky or just flat out hostile to surrogacy for anybody. If we put that same data in a chart, it's even more stark. Yeah, over 60% of states get a green light, meaning the legal path is pretty clear. But that leaves more than a third of the entire country where you're facing legal uncertainty, major roadblocks, or it's just not allowed. Which brings us to a super important question. Let's say you do everything right. You're in a green light state, you have the baby, and both your names are right there on the birth certificate. You're all good, right? Is that enough? Well, the answer might actually surprise you. Before we get to that answer, though, we gotta talk money. Because let's be real, building a family this way is a massive financial investment.
So let's just put a number out there. While a single cycle of reciprocal IVF might cost somewhere in the $20,000 to $35,000 range, a lot of experts will tell you to budget closer to $70,000. Why? Because it often takes more than one try to have a successful pregnancy. That's a more realistic number for the whole journey.
And where does all that money go? Well, this chart breaks it down. You've got your base IVF fees, then add on thousands for meds for both partners. Then there's the cost of donor sperm, all the testing, and maybe other procedures too. You can see how it starts to add up really, really fast.
And that's not even the whole story. There are all these other costs that can sneak up on you. Things like fees if a cycle gets canceled, paying every year to store leftover embryos, legal fees, not to mention travel and taking time off work. It's a lot.
Okay, so this brings us right back to that question we asked before, and to our final, and I would argue most important section, how you make sure your family is legally rock solid. The answer is a legal process called a confirmationary adoption, or a second-parent adoption. What this does is it gives the non-biological parent a formal court order that says you are a legal parent, and because of a little thing in the Constitution, that court order has to be recognized in all 50 states, no exceptions. So why is this so critical, even if you have a birth certificate? Because a birth certificate can be challenged, especially if you travel to one of those red light states. This court order, this adoption, protects your right to make medical decisions in an emergency. It protects your custody rights if, God forbid, you break up. It secures inheritance. It is the legal, ironclad guarantee for your family.
And that really leaves us with this one big question to think about. As our science and technology keep creating these incredible new ways to form families, it puts all the pressure back on our laws to keep up. So the real question for the future is, how do we make our legal system evolve to give every single parent and every single child the security they absolutely deserve?